My name is Laura Bennett, and I was 38 years old when my CEO pulled me into the bathroom during the company party and whispered, "This stays between us." The words barely touched the air, but they hit me like a physical thing, sharp and intimate, and my body reacted before my mind could catch up, breath stalling, pulse jumping, a heat spreading through my chest that made me feel suddenly, painfully awake. The bathroom was too bright, all white tiles and mirrors that reflected us from unflattering angles, like evidence I hadn't agreed to create. Outside, laughter spilled from the rooftop bar, the bass of the music thudding through the walls, but in here everything felt suspended, as if time had leaned back to watch what I would do next. Evan's hand was still at my elbow, not gripping, just there, steady and deliberate, and the closeness made my thoughts tangle. I could smell his cologne, something clean and understated, and beneath it, the faint bitterness of whiskey. I'd been nursing the same glass all evening, more for something to hold than for the drink itself. "I shouldn't have," he said quietly, his reflection catching mine in the mirror. His jaw was tight, eyes darker than they'd been across the room minutes earlier. "I just needed to talk to you without an audience." I told myself to step back, to create space, to remember that this was my workplace, and he was my boss, and I had rebuilt my life too carefully to let it unravel in a moment of blurred judgment. Instead, I nodded, my fingers curling against my palm to stop their trembling. For years, I'd lived by small, disciplined rules. Don't rely too much, don't read into kindness, don't confuse attention with safety. My divorce had taught me how easily affection could become leverage, how slowly boundaries could erode if you let yourself believe someone else knew what was best for you. Evan had never made me feel small like that. If anything, he did the opposite. He listened when I spoke in meetings, asked follow-up questions that showed he'd actually considered my answers, trusted me with decisions that mattered. Over 6 years, that respect had settled into something warmer, more dangerous, and I'd done my best to ignore it. Tonight, though, ignoring it felt impossible. "You disappeared," he said softer now. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm fine," I replied, the lie smooth from practice. "Just needed some air." The door handle rattled, someone laughing loudly on the other side, and Evan stepped back immediately, professionalism snapping into place like muscle memory. The sudden distance felt colder than his proximity had. He gave a small nod, the kind that could mean a dozen different things depending on who was watching. "You don't have to stay late," he said. "You've already done enough this quarter." The kindness in his voice made my throat tighten. I thought of the nights I'd stayed late by choice, the quiet satisfaction of being good at my job, of being needed without being consumed. I thought of how carefully I'd built a life that felt stable, my apartment with its soft yellow lamps, Sunday morning coffee at the corner cafe, friends who didn't ask more of me than I could give. Letting something new in felt like stepping onto ice without knowing how thick it was. I left the bathroom first, smoothing my dress, pasting on a smile that felt just convincing enough. The party blurred after that, congratulations, clinking glasses, a few obligatory conversations, until I slipped out into the night. The city hummed around me, traffic lights blinking, a cool breeze lifting my hair as if trying to clear my head. I stood on the sidewalk waiting for my ride, replaying the moment again and again, telling myself it meant nothing, that tomorrow would reset everything. My phone vibrated in my hand. A new message, unknown number, but I knew before I opened it. "I'm sorry if I crossed the line," it read. I couldn't ignore it anymore. My heart thudded so hard I pressed my free hand to my chest, as if that might steady it. Part of me wanted to delete the message, to protect the fragile balance I'd worked so hard to maintain. Another part, the one that had been quiet for a long time, felt seen in a way that scared me. As the car pulled up and I climbed into the back seat, city lights streaking past the window, I realized the truth I'd been avoiding all evening. Whatever had started between us didn't live in that bathroom. It had been building long before tonight. And now that it had a voice, pretending it didn't exist might cost me more than taking the risk to listen. The tension from that night followed me into Monday morning like a second shadow, quiet but impossible to shake. I felt it in the hum of the elevator as it climbed, in the familiar scent of burnt coffee drifting from the break room, in the way my reflection in the glass doors looked composed even though my chest felt anything but. I told myself the message meant nothing more than an apology, that mature adults acknowledged missteps and moved on. Still, my phone stayed face down on my desk, as if it might light up again if I wasn't careful. Evan didn't call me into his office. That alone unsettled me more than any confrontation would have. Instead, he treated me with the same measured professionalism he always had, greeting me in the morning meeting with a nod, asking for my input on timelines, thanking me when I delivered an answer that moved things forward. To anyone watching, nothing had changed. To me, everything had. Every time his gaze lingered a second too long, every time our hands brushed over a shared folder, my breath tightened and my thoughts scattered. By midweek, the restraint felt heavier than the risk ever had. We were staying late again, end of quarter chaos, fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead, the office emptying out until it was just the two of us and the cleaning crew somewhere down the hall. I was reviewing figures when Evan appeared at the edge of my cubicle, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, looking tired in a way he rarely allowed himself to show. "Walk with me," he asked quietly. Not a command. A question. We ended up outside, the city already dark, streetlights casting long reflections on the wet pavement. The air smelled like rain and hot asphalt, and traffic hissed past in steady waves. For a moment, we stood side by side without speaking, the space between us charged and fragile. "I didn't mean to put you in an uncomfortable position," he said finally, eyes fixed on the street. "I've been replaying that night, wondering if I crossed from honesty into selfishness." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "You didn't force anything," I said. "But it did change things." He nodded, a small, rueful smile tugging at his mouth. "That's what scares me." The word lingered between us. Scares. It cracked something open. He told me then, haltingly, about the failed relationship that had taught him to keep work and personal life rigidly separate, about the pressure of leading a company and being seen as unshakable. I listened, really listened, feeling the edges of my own defenses soften as he spoke. It wasn't a confession of love. It was vulnerability, and somehow that felt more intimate. I shared less, but enough, how my marriage had taught me to equate closeness with loss of control, how I'd learned to build a life that didn't depend on anyone else. Saying it out loud made my throat ache, but it also felt like setting something down I'd been carrying for too long. We didn't touch. We didn't promise anything. When we parted, it was with a careful understanding that whatever this was, it needed time and honesty to survive. Over the next few weeks, that understanding deepened in quiet ways. Coffee left on my desk during early mornings. Late-night emails that slipped, just once, into personal territory before snapping back to safe ground. A shared look across a crowded conference room that carried more meaning than any whispered word. The risk was still there, pulsing beneath every interaction, but so was a growing sense of trust. One evening, as we wrapped up a presentation in his office, the city glowing outside the windows, he looked at me and said, almost casually, "I'm glad you didn't shut me out." I smiled, warmth spreading through my chest, mixed with a familiar ache. "I'm still figuring out what that means." "So am I," he admitted, and for the first time, the uncertainty didn't feel like a threat. It felt like possibility, fragile, yes, but real enough to hold, as long as we were both willing to keep our hands open. The turning point came on a Thursday I hadn't marked as significant, which felt fitting in retrospect. Life rarely announces its pivots. I was halfway through my second coffee when my name appeared on my phone, Evan's number lighting up the screen in the quiet of my apartment. It was early, too early for casual conversation, and my first thought was that something at work had gone wrong. "Can you come in?" he asked when I answered, his voice controlled but strained in a way I'd never heard before. "Not for work. I need to talk to you." The drive felt longer than usual, the city still half asleep, traffic lights blinking yellow like cautious warnings. By the time I reached the office, my chest was tight with a familiar mix of anticipation and dread. I found him in the conference room, jacket draped over a chair, tie gone, sleeves rolled up. He looked tired, older somehow, as if he'd been carrying something heavy all night. I got a call from the board, he said without preamble, hands braced on the table. They're pushing for me to take the international expansion role. It's a promotion. Relocation. London. The word echoed, hollow and loud. London meant distance, meant an end to the careful equilibrium we built. I felt my heartbeat slow, then stumble, like it was deciding whether to keep going. When? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. 3 months. If I accept. If. The small word carried more weight than it should have. I searched his face, looking for certainty, for reassurance, for something I could hold on to. What I found instead was fear, quiet, restrained, but unmistakable. I didn't want you to hear it from anyone else, he said. And I didn't want to pretend it doesn't matter. Something in his honesty broke through my defenses. All the restraint, all the careful distance we'd maintained, suddenly felt fragile and insufficient. Does it matter? I asked softly. To you? He looked at me then, really looked, and the answer was there before he spoke. Yes, he said. More than it should. More than I planned. The confession settled between us, heavy and undeniable. I thought of the years I'd spent choosing safety over risk, of the walls I'd built brick by careful brick. Letting myself want him had already shifted something inside me. Losing him before we'd even begun felt unbearable in a way I hadn't prepared for. I can't be a secret that gets left behind, I said, the words surprising me with their clarity. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. I've done that before. I won't do it again. He nodded slowly, absorbing the truth of it. I don't want that either, he said. But I don't know how to reconcile this with everything else. The room was quiet except for the distant hum of the city waking up outside. I realized then that this wasn't about geography or job titles. It was about whether we were willing to let this be real, with all the complications that came with it. I took a breath, feeling my pulse in my throat. Then maybe we stop pretending we can control the outcome, I said. Maybe we just tell the truth. To ourselves, at least. He crossed the space between us then, not touching, just close enough that I could feel his warmth. I'm scared, he admitted, voice low. Of hurting you. Of losing everything if this goes wrong. So am I replied. But I'm more scared of wondering what would have happened if we never tried. The vulnerability in his expression softened into something steadier, more resolved. He reached out, stopping just short of my hand, giving me the chance to pull away. I didn't. When his fingers closed around mine, the contact was gentle, grounding, and intensely real. We didn't make decisions that morning. We didn't outline plans or timelines. What we did was acknowledge the truth we'd been circling for months, that whatever this was, it mattered enough to deserve honesty and courage. As I left the office, sunlight spilling into the hallway, I felt lighter and more afraid than ever before. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't running from uncertainty. I was walking straight into it, hands still warm from his, heart open in a way that felt both reckless and profoundly right. The high-stakes moment arrived quietly, the way the most important ones always seem to. It wasn't announced with raised voices or dramatic ultimatums. It came on a Sunday afternoon, rain tapping softly against my apartment windows, the city blurred into shades of gray beyond the glass. Evan stood in my living room, coat damp, hair slightly out of place, looking like a man who had made a decision he couldn't take back. I accepted the role, he said, not meeting my eyes at first. But I haven't signed the relocation papers. My chest tightened, every instinct bracing for loss even as hope flickered dangerously close to the surface. I set my mug down carefully, afraid my hands might shake enough to spill it. What does that mean? I asked, my voice barely more than a breath. It means I told them I need time, he said, finally looking at me. His gaze was steady, open in a way I hadn't seen before. And it means I told HR the truth. About us. Or about the possibility of us. The words landed hard, followed by a rush of warmth that spread through me so fast it almost hurt. fear and relief tangled together, my heart racing as I tried to process what he was risking: reputation, control, the carefully managed image he'd worn for years. "You didn't have to do that," I said, even as something inside me softened in a way I couldn't stop. "I know," he replied. "But I didn't want to build anything real on silence or half-truths. Not with you." The sincerity in his voice undid me. I thought of the woman I'd been before, guarded, careful, convinced that safety meant standing alone. I felt the weight of all the almost choices I'd made, all the moments I'd stepped back instead of forward. This time, I didn't want to retreat. "I'm scared," I admitted, the honesty tasting raw and necessary. "I don't know how this fits into my life. Or yours." He stepped closer, slow enough that I could stop him if I wanted to. I didn't. "I'm scared too," he said. "But I know I don't want to keep pretending this doesn't matter." The space between us felt charged, fragile, as if the wrong move might shatter everything. My heartbeat thudded loud in my ears, each breath shallow and deliberate. When he reached out, his fingers brushed my wrist first, a question, not an assumption. The contact sent a warmth up my arm that settled deep in my chest. "I don't need certainty," I said softly, surprising myself with the clarity of it. "I just need honesty. And the chance to choose." He nodded, his thumb tracing a small, grounding circle against my skin. "Then choose me," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "Not the idea of me. Me. Complicated, imperfect, figuring it out as we go." Something inside me loosened, a long-held breath finally released. I stepped into him, resting my forehead against his shoulder, the familiar scent of him wrapping around me. For a moment, we just stood there, rain and city noise fading into the background, the world narrowed to this quiet, fragile truth. When he kissed me, it was unhurried and gentle, like he was giving me space even in the closeness. It wasn't about urgency or heat, it was about connection, about choosing to be present despite the fear. I felt my body respond in small, telling ways, my hands gripping his jacket, my breath catching, a warmth spreading through me that felt like coming home to myself. We didn't solve everything that afternoon. We didn't map out the future or promise that it would be easy. What we did was sit on my couch afterward, knees touching, talking honestly about what we wanted and what we were afraid of losing. We laughed, a little nervously, at how careful we'd both been, how long it had taken to admit what had been there all along. As evening settled in and the rain slowed to a drizzle, Evan squeezed my hand and said, "Whatever happens next, I want it to be real." I squeezed back, feeling steadier than I had in years. "Me too." Later, after he left, I stood by the window watching the city lights come on, my reflection faint in the glass. I didn't feel reckless or overwhelmed. I felt grounded, hopeful in a quiet, resilient way. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't choosing safety over connection. I was choosing myself, and letting someone meet me there, without whispers, without secrets, and without fear being the final word.